Hello, and welcome to 10-Minute Mastery. This session will cover journalizing transactions. This is part 3, journalizing even more transactions. By the end of this 10-minute mastery, you will be able to journalize business transactions. But first, let's review what we know from parts 1 and 2. The process of recording business transactions using a journal is called journalizing. Keep in mind, every transaction impacts at least 2 different accounts. Always record debits first. Also be sure to record your transactions in chronological order. Let's apply what we've learned so far to the following examples. Example 1, business transaction. October 11th, we paid cash for the purchase of land in the amount of $8,000. This transaction impacts the cash account and the land account. This is what it looks like when we journalize this transaction. We first enter the date, and then we do the debit first. In this case, land will be entered under the description, and under the debit column, we have $8,000. Directly below that, on the very next row, we will enter cash for the description, and we will move over to the credit column, and we will enter $8,000. Here in this example, you can see that this business transaction impacts 2 accounts, and we have a debit and a credit. Example 2, business transaction. On October 12th, we paid cash to a part-time office clerk for 2 weeks of wages in the amount of $1,300. This transaction impacts cash and wages expense. Here is our journal entry. October 12th is our date, and then we need to do the debit first. So under description, we have wages expense. Move over to the debit column, and we will enter $1,300. On the very next row, we have cash, and moving over to the credit column, we will enter $1,300. Example 3. Business transaction. On October 13th, we paid cash for the following expenses. Rent expense is $1,300, utilities expense $230, and advertising expense in the amount of $75. This transaction impacts 4 accounts: cash, rent expense, utilities expense, and advertising expense. This is what the journal entry looks like. The first thing we do is enter the date, and then we need to work with those debits first. So on the first line, we're going to enter advertising expense. This is just in alphabetical order. Advertising, rent expense, utilities expense. Those are listed here in alphabetical order, debits first. For advertising expense in the debit column, we have $75. For rent expense in the debit column, we have $1,300. And for utilities expense in the debit column, we have $230. On the next row, we make our credit entry, which is to cash, in the amount of $1,605. Our total debits equal our total credit. Example 4, business transaction. On October 14th, it was determined that the cost of supplies on hand at the end of the month was $800. The supplies used during the month was $400. We're going to work with that $400 amount. This transaction impacts the supplies expense and the supplies account. On October 14th, this transaction occurs, so that's the first thing we're going to enter in our journal entry, the date. Next, we're going to deal with our debit because we record debits first. In this case, we use the supplies expense. We move over to the debit column and enter $400. On the next row of the journal, we have supplies. And then moving over to the credit column, we have $400. Debits equals credits. This transaction impacts two accounts. One more example. Example 5, business transaction. On October 15th, we discovered a defective item of equipment previously purchased from Arctic Company. The item was returned to the supplier, who agreed to reduce the amount charged for the item in the amount of $40. This business transaction impacts accounts payable Arctic Company and equipment. This is what the journal entry looks like for this business transaction. First, we enter the date, October 15th. Next, we do our debit, and that's to accounts payable Arctic Company, $40 debit. On the next row of the journal, we enter equipment, and we move over to the credit column and enter our $40 credit. When we put this all together in the journal on journal page 1, this is what it looks like. These are the journal entries from part 1, part 2, and then this part 3 of Journalizing Transactions. This is what it looks like in the journal. You can see we have October written once at the top of the journal because we're not changing months here. All of these transactions occurred in October. We have the actual date that the transactions occurred, the descriptions of the transactions with the debits listed before the credits. And then in the end, we have debits equals credits in the amount of $21,625. Thank you for viewing. Please feel free to leave any comments below if you feel the need to do so. Don't forget to subscribe and give this video a like.